Alright, here's the first lesson of the Cold War, Unit 10, Cold War Origins, the Beginnings, and the Korean War at the end a little bit. You'll have a little bit more time to read through some of the details of what's going on here. In addition to this essential question, left-hand side for yourself, we will also go ahead and do some analysis of Mr. Truman's policy here during the Cold War. Very super important. Bipolar world, a lot going on, a lot of shifts and changes. Joseph Stalin, shown here in the cartoon, from his lips, whoever occupies a territory imposes his own social system. Everyone imposes his own system as far as his armies can reach. It cannot be otherwise. Sounds like a kind of an aggressive kind of a message, and the West takes it as such. Cold War big ideas. The Soviet Union and the U.S. suppress all disagreements during World War II because they have a common enemy now. The relations have been breaking down toward the end of the war, especially in the last months of 1945. And we have conflicting beliefs coming to the top. Again, different goals, different total viewpoints, philosophies in the post-war period are going to clash significantly. Containment is our key word for the entire Cold War, and it is also going to pass on into the 1950s. This really should say about 1945-ish, somewhere in there is really our concern, but it'll be stated a little bit later on. American foreign policy in this post-war year period is containment. Contain communism, prevent other nations around the world from adopting it. It's spelled out in a series of speeches, plans, and documents over the course of this entire Cold War, especially early on. The original goal was to maintain European stability with this. However, as the communist movements grow and develop in Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, the United States extends the policy to being one worldwide gradually over time. So we're the defender of democracy. We've become really the policeman for democracy in the world. And the Soviet Union is establishing and has established itself as dominant. And it's this Truman Doctrine, which is essentially the same as saying containment, that is going to be the roadblock to this, or attempted roadblock to keeping it right where it is. And the United States in this is basically using this to take responsibility for defending democracy throughout the world, as we said before. So we've got a bipolar world here at this time. Communist on one side, Western European on the other side. You can see it pretty clearly set up there. In 1947, at Fulton College in Missouri, former Prime Minister of Britain is making a speech, and it's known as the Iron Curtain speech. And he basically says an iron curtain or a wall has descended across Europe, and nothing gets through that wall one way or another. And this has been established by Stalin and the Soviets. It's not a literal wall yet, but like this necessarily, but there's a real control of what's crossing it, and trying to basically set up two different types of worlds here in this. And there's Mr. Churchill looking underneath things here. So this is a term that's describing the development of two different societies, two different political systems, and that it's not a positive thing. A series of maps here going from 1942 during the war. If we look down at our key down here, types of government: communist, autocracy, traditional monarchies, no government at all. On the other side here to the right, multi-party democracy, limited democracy, and measured out in have our little key over here showing numbers of people relative to space, geography here, and all this. So we really got the Soviet Union being the only communist nation here in 1942. But it's going to shift a little bit here in 1952. See the difference? There it is, China 1949, and also North Korea shifting into that mode as well in the 1950s. And late 1948 to 1957, about the same. All right, 1962. Things are shifting. Difference here, I'm sorry, I forgot 1957, we have North Vietnam. It's going to be split. Indochina is going to be split between North and South. We have North Vietnamese expanding here in communism, expanding the communism there, 1962. And the difference here in our world, Cuba, 1959. Fidel Castro, 1967. Checking out the blue and democracies, what's happening here, gains from both sides, kind of a little relative split. What's going on in Central and South America, big deal over here with the Castro regime. 1972, about the same. A little bit of growth here in Africa. 1977. Cambodia. 1982. Getting closer to the Cold War. This is the age of the Reagan administration. And then 1987. Again, about the same. Numbers of countries, so on and so forth. Democracy expanding well here into 1992. At this point here, we get 1989, 1990, the fall of the Soviet Union and the breakup of the Soviet Union. We have multiple countries around the fringes being formed, and democracy expands. The Cold War is won. All right, so this is what things are looking like from here to the end of the year. 1997, democracy under Boris Yeltsin, but it's looking a little bit different than that right now. Russia would not be necessarily in this full blue area. It might be in the area of a limited democracy, you might say here. Not completely free or completely laissez-faire, you would say, in Western terms, American terms. Post-World War II planning, again, we were talking about this before. Questions, what do we do with the lands occupied by the Soviet Union? How should the governments be set up in areas devastated by war? 1945, this meeting of the Big Three at Yalta, the Soviets agreed to free elections in occupied territories, split Germany into 4 different zones, and to attack Japan 3 months after VE Day, and in exchange for territory in Manchuria. FDR gets quite a bit of criticism for giving in too much to the Soviet Union here with this. And again, this is really what it's looking like in 1945, again, with some different color coding. Satellite nations controlled by Soviet Union, got their own governments, but it's really controlled by the USSR, funded by, subsidized, supported by them, and strings attached all the way around. Germany, East Germany, West Germany, communist Western countries, splitting it up afterward as well. The United Nations, 1945, is formed. They have the first conference held in San Francisco. 50 nations get together, including the Soviet Union. Again, this is League of Nations 2.0, some more teeth. There's a Security Council with these same 5 people who are still here today to kind of make sure that there is some sort of agreement on trying to keep everybody in check and at peace. We've seen this name before, Mary McLeod Bethune, Florida, native advisor to FDR in the Black Cabinet, was the founder of the first African American school for girls that eventually became Bethune Cookman School in Daytona Beach. She is the only black woman present at this founding of the United Nations at that time. Significant individual, you might see her on a test question somewhere. So, big question here for us also, besides the essential question, how would the Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan expressions of containment policy? How do they keep things where they're at? Stop the spread of communism. In Eastern Europe, again, we have no free elections. The Yalta Conference is basically has a promise that was made there, which there were supposed to be free elections in Eastern Europe, especially Poland. It's broken. It doesn't happen. We've got a split, east, west. We pretty much know this. Iron Curtain. Again, the Soviet Union is cutting off Europe from the West. Information, trade products, supply, things of that nature, commerce really isn't happening so much. There's a concern also in 2 key countries here, like Turkey to the south of Europe and in Greece, that there are communist elements growing in power there. Britain has occupied it since the end of the war. They're in terms of military control, but they're having economic troubles. They announced that they're going to leave. This makes us in the West, the United States West, and other Western countries very concerned. And because of this, we get the Truman Doctrine, 1947. At the present moment of the world history, nearly every nation must choose between alternative ways of life. The choice is too often not a free one. One way of life is based on the will of the majority. The second way of life is based on the will of the minority, forcibly imposed upon the majority. I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities, minority communist groups, radical groups, elements, or other outside pressure. The free peoples of the world look to us to support them in maintaining their freedoms. If we falter our leadership, we may endanger the peace of the world, and we shall surely endanger the welfare of our own nation. Sounds like we need to have our defense beyond our borders. We're involved in the world proactively from the end of World War II to the present with this policy. Alternative ways, really referencing communism. He doesn't use the term communism, but that's what he's really referencing. So, we come in and replace Britain with our own aid. And in this cartoon, we've got a new road that we're trekking on here a little bit, and it might be a little bit unknown. Money to aid Greece and Turkey to prevent them from falling to communism. This is the Truman Doctrine. So if we do it once, it's going to mean we're going to probably do it again and again and again. Wherever this communist threat, here's Greece, here's Turkey, concerned that it might expand other places, we've got to do it with money, support, prevent that. In Western Europe, and Japan is also concerned for us. So it's really not a lot of, it's a military presence, but it's money support, make sure economically things are solid there. But there is going to be a concern here that, one, we have a priority, or there is a notion here that develops in that we have a priority. Our priority is, as you can kind of see, a concern with Western Europe. He already has part of it. What if he gets more? There's only so many resources and so much willpower of the United States and in the United States public opinion and money to go to do both. And basically in Asia, that takes a second place priority to maintaining things as they are and preventing communism from spreading there. So we're going to see a lack of commitment in Asia, and this is going to result in the first of our proxy wars, an attempt to spread communism, that being the Korean War in 1950. Focusing on threatened nations, and our threats seem to be worse here in Europe compared to Asia. And of course, the cultural ties, the political ties, are much, much stronger here in Europe. So containing the Soviets, not only with that money and that support for Turkey and Greece, but there's a concern that war-torn Europe is so unstable that these people could choose communism. Communism could grow there in the post-war time period. So what's proposed is something called the Marshall Plan, and it's proposed by the top general in the war, George C. Marshall, and he says we need to give a significant amount of aid to all of Europe. Keep them economically stable, keep them tied to this so they don't choose communism. This also is going to keep Americans working. This is big for our post-war economy. Our economy is going to keep growing after World War II, and this is a big deal. We're going to help rebuild Europe, and it's going to be a huge success story. However, Congress wasn't too enthused about all this massive money for this aid program, and here you can kind of see where we've got Stalin helping push people into his bus and his transportation system, and there's Truman on the other side, Liberty Hotel, Pension Rus, and Balkan District Railway. You know, what side are people going to choose? And so this plan is really meant to keep us attractive to other foreign countries so that they don't turn communist. But in 1948, February, the communists took over power in Czechoslovakia, and that was enough to frighten Congress into supporting the Marshall Plan, 1948. Cartoon, can you block it? Marshall Plan, Stalin, European recovery. We really would like to see it blocked because he wants his influence there. And it's going to be a huge success. One of the first key conflicts between communism and the West is 1948. Also, crisis in Berlin. It's surrounded by communist East Germany, and Germany, again, of course, is divided, as we talked about before, but so is the city of Berlin. It's split, as you can see down here, in half. Communist on one half, over here in the east, Western powers splitting the city up in three pieces, just like here in the west. Stalin blocks off all the railroads, all the communications, starts shutting off power, things of that nature, and he's trying to starve them out. He says, get out of Berlin, out of West Berlin. And the U.S. response is, what do we do? Do we invade? Well, that's probably going to mean nuclear war. The plan that they developed and they executed is something called an airlift. They supply the entire city of Berlin for months with basics, food, water, toilet paper, clothes, that kind of thing. And if you want an interesting little clip on YouTube to find to check out with this, it's pretty funny. Is do a little search called on the Candy Bomber Berlin blockade. And so this was a success, and it's important for you to label this and annotate this being a super big success. Eventually, the blockade is lifted and Stalin gives up, and we stand up to the communists and we contain them. We keep it where it's at. They don't push us out. In 1948, after this is all done, here's kind of a map of this happening. There was just a constant rotation. Every minute or 2 minutes or a few seconds, a plane was landing during that entire time period to keep those people alive there and functioning. We have two nations being formed here, East Germany, which is going to become known as GDR, German Democratic Republic. Sounds kind of opposite of communism, right? And the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany. And out of this also there is the development of an alliance system that comes from this as well. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is formed in 1949. It's around yet today. It's a big issue today, and it's meant and formed for the purpose of defending against the spread of aggressive countries. That means communism. This is its purpose, and the idea is collective security. Big term, important term for us. It means an attack on one is attack on all. Remember the League of Nations and Article 10? It said the same thing, and Congress said we don't want any part of it. It's going to mean we're be potentially in conflict anywhere around the world at any time. Well, it's doing the same thing here, and it's also very much like the alliance system that was set up before World War I that made it explode to a large conflict that it was. So this is a map of what it kind of looks like. This might be a little bit outdated. Yeah, that's 2008. It might be a little bit different here, I think, today, but it's a defensive alliance to prevent that spread of communism. Two armed camps here then are developing. So with this in response, the Soviet Union is going to form something called the Warsaw Pact. And this is their response to the formation of NATO. And basically it's a NATO type thing. It's a military alliance of these satellite nations. And they're going to have operated under the same function. And they're there to oppose NATO in case there's a major war. And they're going to collectively fight against the West and NATO forces. And so Europe is further divided. So we really have a little arms buildup in this sense. And again, this is what it kind of looks like in the time period we're talking about here, at least until 1982, somewhere in there. Cold War methodologies, you might recognize some of this. There's no James Bond without the Cold War. Espionage, KGB versus the CIA. Vladimir Putin was a former agent of the KGB before he became president. There's an arms race, nuclear escalation that's going to develop here, ideological competition for the hearts and minds of third world peoples. Again, we mentioned before, there's a lot of former colonies of the British and the French that are going to start falling away. The Philippines falls away from the United States. And there's a competition and effort to try and get those countries on one of the two sides. And it's going to result in no direct conflicts here, right? We've got a Cold War. It's not hot. Hot would be direct fighting between the two nations. But it's a proxy war in which some other country is basically fighting, and we're supplying them, and eventually we're going to have soldiers that are in that particular war fighting against the other side that's fighting for the Soviets and being supplied by the Soviets. So we just have this bipolar world going on here, two major powers. There's an arm race. It's all about building the biggest and the best. Significant growth and expenditures of money on this. It's way up during World War II. It comes right down right away, but as soon as we get to some certain events in the Cold War happening here, especially when the Soviet Union detonates its own atomic bomb in 1949 coming up, it goes in a completely different direction. We must lead the way. We must stay ahead. There's something called the National Security Council that's still around today that's formed, a group of military men and key advisors of the president to deal with situations and plan and consider what's going on. And in all this process, we're going to have the largest military in history. 1946, again, the United States, as mentioned before, is going to give the Philippines their own, their independence, and that was according to the Tennessee-McDuffie Act in 1934, and it only could happen until the war was done. And the European powers at the same time, again, are losing control of some of their colonies, and this independence movement, decolonization movement, is happening because of the ideals set forth in the Atlantic Charter and the purpose of the war, and they just can't hold on to them anymore either anyway. There's also the formation of the nation of Israel that's established through the United Nations, the support of the United States, and it is going to establish basically a state for both sides to begin with, but the Holocaust and World War II set in motion this understanding there needs to be a place for people of Egypt. And historically, in biblical history, there were ancient kingdoms for both sides in this area. Before it's called Palestine, and of course it's going to become Israel, as it is today. It's a shared holy city of Jerusalem is there as well, international city, important religiously to both Muslims and to Christians. But of course, from here on, when this is developed, there's constant war and conflict over it, and around them are nations that are Islamic and of the Arabic culture and background that are not too thrilled about them being there. So, 1949, some significant stuff happening here in China. China turns red. After the war, or excuse me, before World War II, there was a civil war going on between communists and Chinese nationalists for control of the country. They got invaded by Japan in 1937, and then they stopped, and when the war was done, the fighting continued, and in 1949 it culminates in the communists winning and kicking out the nationalists, and the nationalists fleeing to a place called Taipei. Well, excuse me, not Taipei, Formosa at the time, Taipei being the city. Today it is present nation of Taiwan, and the People's Republic, excuse me, of China, which is Communist China, is not recognizing, and never has since that time, that as an independent country. They push and promote something called the One China policy, and any country that wants to have a connection or diplomatic relationship with China cannot say anything different, and the United States is basically in that particular mode. One China policy is something that we don't challenge. However, we would challenge any attacks on that island and would defend it heavily if there were some sort of threat to Taiwan's independence or being taken over. 1949, as I mentioned before, the USSR detonates an atomic bomb, and this kind of comes about because of some individuals that leaked some information. September 3rd, 1949, a U.S. spy plane picked up evidence of this radioactivity, and 1950 it was understood, and through some investigation and things going on and court trial, there's a guy by the name of Klaus Fuchs, a German-born physicist who helped build the United States' first atomic bomb, was arrested for passing secrets to the Soviet Union, and he was eventually released. With this, Truman, the United States, says if they have the atomic bomb, we have to have something better. He orders the development of a better bomb. It's called the hydrogen bomb, the H-bomb. Here's relative size. Hiroshima, Trinity, Hiroshima bombs. That's how big they are in scope compared to the eventual development of the largest bomb by the Soviets later on in the Cold War, called the Tsar Bomba. And this, of course, is going to escalate escalate the arms race significantly. We're concerned that there's increased espionage, trying to find out our secrets, plus the loss of the atomic supremacy leads to this project. It's hundreds of times more powerful than the A-bomb. In 1952, the United States detonates the hydrogen bomb, and it was called Mike. Vaporizes the whole island of the Pacific, left a 1-mile wide crater. So it's a completely different situation and deal now with the nuclear weapons. It's getting out of control. The Korean War, and what goes on here is significant. You're going to be working on a matrix to kind of detail some of these and get into this more in detail, but I'm going to cover it for you here a little bit very quickly here. The Korean War is quite often considered the forgotten war. It's also the first proxy war in which the United States isn't fighting directly against the Soviet Union, but we know the Soviet Union is involved somehow, some way. It's supporting or supplying things through Communist China, and Communist China is going to get involved with all this. And it's going to be a United Nations effort to try and contain and keep South Korea democratic, Western supported. And this happens when Truman basically says, we're going to make an open statement. The United States starts pulling out resources out of South Korea, and the North Koreans see an opportunity and they invade. And it was divided this way at the end of the war, at the 38th parallel, the communists here, and it remained divided after your occupation. And with that removal of Western resources and the United States reducing money and military support in South Korea, all of a sudden, within days or weeks, we have this invasion happening. And so we have this war. It's going to go on for about 3 years, and it's going to be a situation where we believe that they're supported by the USSR. There's no Soviet troops there, but there are mostly Korean troops here, North Korean troops here. Eventually it's going to be a situation where we have Chinese soldiers fighting here as well. And so it's mostly fought with U.S. supplies and U.S. people, but the United Nations has other countries participating in this as well. It's a multinational force against them, against the communist invasion. The general that's is commanding the whole thing is General Douglas MacArthur of the Pacific War of World War II. He's also basically the guy who's controlling and had redeveloped and rebuilt and was rebuilding Japan at the time. And it's a back and forth seesaw kind of event. Right away, early on, as you can see by the map on the right, it was a almost near disaster and complete win for the North Koreans, but MacArthur makes a incredible, daring launch invasion at a place called Incheon to swing things in a different direction. But basically the war turns into a stalemate very quickly, and it's going to stay a stalemate for about 2 years, and the United States, or excuse me, the UN is going to basically retake South Korea and hold it until the end of the war. There are, as you can see by the map here, attempts to push beyond the 38th parallel. One of the key issues of the war was that how far do we go? Do we just go back to the line where it was and contain communism where it was? Or do we keep going? And MacArthur really wanted to keep going and pushing forward. Some said maybe we shouldn't do that because the Chinese said if we get too close, they were really concerned that we're going to come invade China as well. Truman said keep going, and as we get closer to something known as the Liaolu River up here, all of a sudden we start seeing massive numbers and human waves of millions of Chinese soldiers coming into North Korea and supporting North Koreans, and the war is a totally different thing. And this is where it stalemates and goes backwards and goes back and forth and settles around the border for a very long time. The leadership here again is very divided. It's a stalemate for about 2 years. There's a conflict between MacArthur and Truman. MacArthur thinks Truman doesn't know what he's doing, and MacArthur even talks about doing things like using the atomic bomb in the war, and Truman doesn't like that because the atomic bomb is not containing things, it's kind of expanding things, and he spoke openly about that a few too many times, and MacArthur is fired. The biggest war hero really of World War II comes back to the United States to big massive parades. The American public is angry beyond all get out at Truman for doing this, and he goes away. The treaty and the end of the war comes in 1953, ironically just not too long, weeks, maybe a couple months after that Stalin guy dies. Contemporaries pretty much believe and support the idea that Stalin really was behind keeping it going. It creates a new demilitarized zone in which no one can enter. It's still there yet today. It's still drawn on along the 38th parallel. There are about 30,000 or so American soldiers and forces there today since the end of 1953. Either side won. Deaths, 54,000 Americans, 2 million Koreans and Chinese died, plus more. The chart I'll show you in a little bit. Containment was achieved here. It was successful with this, but there's been no end to the war. There's been no treaty. No treaty. Essentially, there's a state of war that is existing here in that area because there's been no treaty that has ever been signed. And here again are the massive statistics of deaths on all sides. Unbelievable. Not very many people know about this either. Smaller than World War II, but pretty significant for a 3-year war and a small contained little area. So that ends the first lesson here and the introduction to the beginnings, the origins, some of the key things going on here in terms of conflicts with the Cold War, and we'll keep expanding it here as we get into the 1950s and our new president, Mr. Eisenhower. Make hay, people.